The sky over the frontier town had the color of rusted iron, a dull twilight pressing low as though the heavens themselves were ashamed of what the ground would hold before night. Dust swirled in the street, carried by the restless wind that never seemed to stop moving to the wide, barren valley. Men crowded in front of the saloon, their boots planted hard, their voices thick with whiskey and judgment. At the center of it all stood Jonas McGraw, his broad shoulders square though his eyes carried the weariness of too many years wandering without belonging. His hands were bound with coarse rope, wrists rubbed raw, but he did not flinch as the sheriff announced his fate. Jonas had been accused of striking Earl Tate, the sheriff's only son, a brash youth who thought his father's badge gave him the right to sneer at drifters and call them less than men. Cards had been played, harsh words had been exchanged, and in a moment of fury Jonas's fist had found its mark. For that, the town wanted punishment. Some called for the rope, others for the whip, but Sheriff Tate, with his heavy jowls and hard eyes, chose something meant to sting longer than pain: marriage. Not a marriage of choice, not one made of tenderness, but a binding force on Jonas to make him feel the weight of humiliation. The sheriff turned to where she stood, a young Apache woman, her wrists also tied, her shawl threadbare, her chin lifted despite the degradation. $5, the sheriff said, holding up a coin for all to see. That's what she was bought for in Tucson before being sent here. And now, Jonas McGraw, she'll be your wife, your punishment and your burden. Laughter rolled to the crowd, ugly and sharp. Jonas felt the heat of shame flood his neck. He wanted to spit back at them, to remind them that none of their hands were clean, but the rope cut into his wrists and his pride was already heavy. He turned his head, forcing his gaze to meet hers. Her eyes were dark, steady, unbroken. She did not lower them, did not weep, did not beg. She only stared at him as if to say she had endured worse, and would endure this too. The makeshift wedding was performed in front of the jeering townsfolk, vows spoken through clenched jaws. Jonas muttered the words like gravel in his throat, while she, Sahel, they said her name was, spoke them with a voice quiet but unwavering. The ring was nothing more than a strip of leather pulled from a saddle, tied around her finger with a careless knot. When it was done, the sheriff declared them man and wife, the crowd roaring with derision. To them it was theater, a punishment dressed in ceremony. To Jonas it was chains. To Sahel it was another wound carved into a life already scarred. They were released, though not freed. Their horses waited at the edge of town, and they mounted in silence, riding out beneath the red dusk. Behind them, the sound of laughter followed like ghosts. Ahead, the prairie stretched endless, a land both cruel and unyielding, yet the only place left for them now. Jonas led her to the cabin he had built years ago when he thought he might settle down. The dream had rotted, leaving only a rough shack on the far edge of the valley, half forgotten and weather-worn like its owner. The ride was long, and neither spoke. Sahel's posture never slumped, though her wrists bled where the ropes had been cut. Her dignity was armor, and Jonas could not look at her without feeling the sharp edge of his own shame. When they reached the cabin, Jonas dismounted and opened the door. The air inside smelled of dust and pine sap. He lit a lantern, its glow falling across the bare table, the cot in the corner, the iron stove. "It's not much," he muttered, his voice gruff. She said nothing. She walked inside, stood by the fire as though staking claim to her place without asking. Jonas fetched water, set a tin cup on the table. "Drink," he said. She stared at it for a long moment, then turned away, refusing. Pride would not let her take even this. The silence stretched, heavy, until Jonas turned and busied himself with chores that did not need doing. He stacked wood, checked the latch, moved about the cabin like a man chased by shadows. He had not asked for this. He had not asked for her. Yet here they were, bound together by cruelty not of their making. The next morning, Jonas found her outside splitting wood with a blunt axe. Her hands were blistered, but she swung with precision, each strike fueled by something fierce inside her. He opened his mouth to tell her to stop, that it wasn't her place, but the words died. She had chosen labor over pity. He turned instead and repaired a broken fence post, working side by side without speaking. That evening a storm rose sudden and violent, Rain lashing against the windows, wind rattling the cabin walls. Jonas sat at the table, staring at the flame while thunder rolled. From a corner, he heard a sound, soft, low, a song. Sahel was humming, her voice like smoke curling through the room. He did not know the words, but the cadence was haunting, familiar. His mother had once sung the same lilt when he was a boy, rocking him through fever. The memory startled him, left his chest aching. He did not speak, but he listened, and something inside him shifted. Days passed. Their rhythms settled, not in comfort, but in uneasy truce. Jonas left food on the table each morning. By night it was gone. He mended her shawl when he noticed it torn. The next day a car beat appeared near his cup, a silent offering. They spoke little, but their gestures began to weave a fragile thread between them. One neither wished to admit, yet the world beyond their cabin would not leave them be. When Jonas rode into town for supplies, the saloon crowd erupted in jeers. "How's the $5 bride?" One man laughed, spitting tobacco at Jonas's boots. The shopkeeper narrowed his eyes and muttered about savages eating up decent men's bread. Jonas's fists clenched, his temper burning, but he held his tongue. Shame was a weight heavier than rage. He rode home hollow, anger boiling beneath his skin. But when he reached the cabin, he found Sahel kneeling in the dirt, hands torn and bleeding as she worked to free a colt tangled in barbed wire. The young horse thrashed, eyes wild with fear. Without hesitation, she pressed forward, whispering low, soothing it with her voice until the wire loosened and the animal stumbled free. Blood streaked her palms, but her gaze was calm, proud. Jonas dismounted and approached, stunned. She looked at him then, not as jailer nor enemy, but as man. The moment lingered, fragile as glass. That night, Jonas could not sleep. He stared at the rafters, listening to her quiet breathing by the fire. He thought of the crowd's laughter, the sheriff's coin, the humiliation of being bound by force. Yet when he thought of her, he did not feel pity. He felt something deeper, sharper, the recognition of resilience, of defiance that matched his own. The following week, the tension grew. One evening, he found himself teaching her to hold his revolver, her hand steady despite the weight. She showed him words in her tongue, laughter slipping unbidden between them when his pronunciation faltered. For a moment, the cabin was no longer a prison, but a place alive with something unspoken. It could not last unchallenged. One night, hooves thundered down the lane. Jonas stepped outside, lantern in hand, and found 3 drunken ranch hands at his gate, torches blazing. Their faces gleamed with contempt. "Send her out," one barked. "No white man keeps a savage for a wife. She don't belong here." Jonas felt the old fire rise, the anger he had kept buried. He stood firm, rifle in hand, though it remained lowered. "She's mine," he said, voice steady as stone. "Not by your coin, but by my choice. You'll not take her." The men sneered, spat into the dirt. One nudged his horse forward, torch flaring, but Jonas did not move. His scar caught the firelight, his stance unyielding. For a long breath the night held still. Then the men cursed, turned their horses, and vanished into the dark, leaving smoke in their wake. Jonas lowered the rifle, his hands trembling. Behind him, Sahel stepped out of the shadows, knife glinting in her grip. Their eyes met. For the first time, he saw not shame but something close to trust. Slowly, she placed her hand against his chest, the gesture small yet filled with fire. No words passed, but the silence between them burned hotter than flame. And as the dawn crept over the horizon, painting the prairie gold, Jonas realized the punishment meant to break him had instead bound him to a woman whose strength he could neither deny nor resist.